I guess my microphone is working. Right, I can hear. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today to listen to me speak. It's a great pleasure to be here in Houston. I just got here, I don't know when I got here actually, but 2 days ago. And I was here last year with the director of the Royal School of Church Music. We were just sort of looking at the choral tradition in America, and we traveled around. But I'm delighted to come here this week to run the RSCM Gulf course with all the girl choristers and your wonderful choir here. I was trying to work it out, I think it's the 12th or 13th course that I've run over some 25 years or so, but I've not been to Houston before except last year, so really looking forward to it. Anna Teagarden asked me if I do a little talk to you today about the English choral tradition, and by way of that, just talking a little bit about my own experiences over the last X number of years. I think it was St. Augustine who said that he who sings prays twice. And I'm very, very aware of the importance of music in our worship and our liturgy. And it's amazing, this church here, you're very, very lucky to be able to have a fantastic choir, to have some fantastic contemporary worship as well. And although I grew up very much in a traditional sphere of church music, I'm nowadays very open and I have very broad Catholic tastes in terms of music. And I think as long as music is prepared and done well towards the glory of God, then it's a good thing. And it's a very powerful evangelical tool as well, as you all realize, and it brings people in to church. And it's an international language. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to travel around the world a bit doing music and running courses, and wherever I go, you make friends immediately because we're all we all speak the same language, the musical language. So I think you need to be proud of your tradition here at St. John's. And all that it brings to you. I now work very much, I'm a freelance musician nowadays. I do a lot of composing, I write a lot of music, I do a lot of broadcasting. I'm very passionate about church music, and I work for a couple of television companies and make programs about church music across the world. I arrange music for a lot of different artists in England, which I enjoy, orchestrating for CDs and things like that. But very much my deep-rooted love is in church music. So I thought, without being too indulgent, I'd just sort of talk through my life in church music, and then I'm particularly going to talk about Salisbury Cathedral, where I was the organist and director of music for 10 years, because I know that your choir is going to be going out there next year, and I want to sort of whet your appetite about Salisbury Cathedral. I feel very lucky, very fortunate indeed, that I've worked at every level of church music in England, from being a cathedral chorister through to being director of music at a well-known cathedral. And then indeed I spent a year working at a Cambridge college running the choir there as well. And I've learnt all the way along, and I've picked up all sorts of interesting things along the way. I started off, I'm going to see if this clicker works. Forgive me if, right, you can see that. So I started off when I was 7 years old. I don't know how many of you have ever visited Bristol in England. This wonderful church, St. Mary Redcliffe Church in Bristol, which Queen Elizabeth I described as the fairest and goodliest church in all of England. It really is stunningly beautiful. And for those of you who are interested in organs, you see that 4-manual console there. That is one of the great organs of England, and people are musicians. Everyone wants to play at Redcliffe. Interestingly enough, quite recently, about 3 months ago, they invited me to advise on the appointment of a new director of music at St. Mary Redcliffe, and we thought we'd be inundated with organists, which we were, but the chap that got the job couldn't play the organ at all. but he was brilliant with the choir. So that was... Anyway, I started off as a little boy there, and we used to sing on Sundays, and I enjoyed it very much. But I was only there for about 6 months because I don't know why he said this, but my choir master said that I had quite a good voice and that really I ought to be joining a cathedral choir, which I found very strange because having run parish church choirs myself, I thought that I've always tried to keep hold of all my choristers and not pass them on to cathedrals. Anyway, I had 2 cousins who were at Westminster Abbey in the choir, and my dad said, my dad knew nothing about church music, and he asked my uncle whether I ought to try for Westminster Abbey, and my uncle said absolutely not, because the choir master at Westminster Abbey at the time was quite a difficult man, and my cousins didn't enjoy it. So my choir master at St Mary Redcliffe had been a chorister at St Paul's Cathedral in London. I'm going to click. Oh my gosh. I haven't changed a bit. So I was invited to do an audition to St Paul's Cathedral. And in those days, there was a very distinguished choir master called Sir John Dyke-Spower, who'd been the choir master there for, I think, something like 35 years. And I went and I sang to him, and he liked my voice, and he took me on. The next day, he announced his retirement. And I think to this day that I think he realized that his judgment was flawed, and that he took me on. Anyway, I mean, I did 2 terms with him, and I spent 5 years at St. Paul's. That's a picture of me in the middle when I was about 12. On the left-hand side, that picture, we used to wear Eton suits, which they wear at Eton College, but with stripy trousers, very sharp collars, short jackets. That was taken the week before I went to start when I was 8.5 years old. I look a little bit scared. And then we used to wear mortarboards and gowns as well, so the whole shebang. And then that's a picture of me at school with my school cap on. And it was a wonderful time. I was there for 5 years, and the regime in cathedral choir schools is very disciplined. In those days in St. Paul's, there were only 38 of us in the whole school. We were the choristers. And our day was just filled with music, from early morning practice to choir practice to lessons and then services. And we sang for 15 services a week, which was pretty amazing. They do about half that now, but it was 15 services a week then, and we were just immersed in music. And for me personally, it really worked. It was wonderful. I was saying to Anna a day or so ago that my parents lived in Bristol, which is about 100 miles from London, and in those days we were only allowed to see our parents once in a month for 2 hours. That was all you had to. So you just sort of got on with it, really. And I was saying, I've got a 10-year-old son who, in a way, I'd love him to be a chorister, but actually, being very selfish, I don't want to give him away. I'd rather sort of enjoy singing growing up. But for me, it worked really well, and big services, used to see the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. We sang actually for a big memorial service of President Eisenhower as well, which I remember vividly. And it was a great experience. And I think being a chorister, whether you're a cathedral chorister singing 15 services a week or a church chorister, you learn so many life-affirming qualities. You learn about punctuality, you learn about being part of a team, you learn about the highest possible professional standards. In fact, in England, being a cathedral chorister, it's the only discipline that I can think where we expect the choristers to be as professional as the adult singers. You know, you expect an 11-year-old boy or an 11-year-old girl to be able to sing anything as well as the adults. So many life-affirming qualities, which it didn't matter what sort of discipline you went into in later life, those qualities were really good. And there are a lot of very successful people in the UK and across the world, be it politicians, be it business people, be it musicians, who have started as cathedral choristers. So Wonderful times there. From St. Paul's, I dread to think what the next pic. Oh, look, here we go. So that's a record we made, and in the bottom row, in the middle, that's me with an incredibly bad haircut. I remember there was an instruction that my parents used to get at the beginning of every term, and it just said this: a boy's hair to be cut shortly before he returns to school. And to this day, I never understood whether that meant the day before he went to school or the hair length was very short. But we used to have a chap used to come in with a sort of pudding bowl and put it on our head and just sort of clip round. It was pretty desperate. And on the left-hand side, that's the choristers. That's how we used to rehearse every day. That's my choirmaster at the top there. And we used to be in stands with an older boy and a little boy. And you sort of learn from each other as you go along, and obviously from the choirmaster. And then I just stuck that in the cricket captains. Cricket was my big thing. I know it's a very English thing, and of course at the moment we're playing the Australians. But I was a cricket captain. I'm very proud of that. And somewhere on that board, on the right-hand side near the top, SRA Lole, I was captain for two seasons. So after that, there's St. Paul's again, and there's a picture of us at the Queen Elizabeth Hall doing a concert. We used to do lots of concerts around the place, so it's wonderful. So I then went to university in London at King's College, and down the bottom there is a music college that I went to at the Guildhall. And then my very first job was at Barking Parish Church in East London, where I stayed for two years. I applied for the job, and I got the job because I was the only candidate. And all I was looking for was somewhere where there was a free flat, and that job came with a free flat. So I spent 2 years there, and they were very happy years. It was a very mixed group of people in the choir. We had about 35, 40 people in the choir, and it went from, there was a lovely old lady called Elsie, and Elsie was 94, and she could hardly walk. She was deaf. She was almost blind. I don't think she could sing, but she'd been in the choir for years, and she was so lovely, and she sat in the same place. She never stood up. And from Elsie down to some little kids, sort of age 7 and 8. And what that taught me as a musician was about dealing with people. And I think the one thing we don't always realize working with musicians is that musicians are people, and that your job as the choirmaster is to inspire them, to make them want to sing really specially. And from my own experience as a little boy, I remember my choirmaster inspired me, and I wanted to give him my very best. So I learned a lot at Barking. It wasn't always successful. I made lots of mistakes. I was young, but here's just an interesting thing I thought might amuse you, that this church was near a big car factory, and all the young guys used to work at the car factory, and they all had money in their pockets, and they all seemed to get engaged to a girl when they were about 17 years old. And so I was there for 2 years, and we used to have, during the summer, 8 weddings every Saturday, all through the summer. My first year at Barking, I played for 247 weddings. To this day, 40 years later, I can still tell you what the vicar said in every talk that he gave. I had 2 very wonderful ladies called Pat and Elsie. I want to share Pat and Elsie with you just for a moment, because one day, they always disappeared after every wedding. And one day the rector came to me and he wanted to speak to Pat, and he said, "Do you know where Pat is?" And I said, "I don't know, but they seem to go outside." Anyway, I went out to find them because he wanted to speak to them. And there was Pat and Elsie round the back of the church. They were both sort of in their 60s, feet up on the wall, handbag open, bottle of whiskey sticking out of and a cigarette in their mouth. But it was real. And so I learned a lot, and that's what I learned about dealing with people. I then went on to, on the left-hand side here, Croydon Parish Church, which is in South London, and it was very close to Addington Palace, where the Royal School of Church Music was based, and so that's the connection with me being here now. And back in the 1980s, I started my very long association with the Royal School of Church Music. Croydon Parish Church had a boys' choir and it had a girls' choir as well. And that's where I first started sort of learning about working with girls as well as with boys. And it was at that church that I wrote a piece a long time ago, which I seem to be synonymous with, which is a piece called The Father's Love. And I wrote it for that a girl who got married in that church. And I was there for 5 years, and that was very special. Again, I learned even more. Good musical tradition there. And then I moved to St Mary's Collegiate Church in Warwick, that very fine church there. And at the bottom there, there's this wonderful chantry chapel, part of it. St Mary's Warwick had the best church choir in England. We had 30 boys, 18 men. There was quite a lot of money there, which did help. But I worked there for 9 years, and I had a very innovative rector who thought we had this wonderful tradition of music with boys and men. So the next thing was we needed a girls' choir. And there were lots of girls, a couple of very good girls' schools around. So I started a girls' choir, which within, I suppose, a month went from virtually nothing to about 30 girls. And I went back there last year, actually, and celebrated 30 years of the girls. And in fact, we started our girls' choir just before Salisbury Cathedral started theirs, which delighted me. And it was really interesting to start a new choir. It's difficult to keep traditions going, but it's even harder to start from nothing. And we just chose a little bit of music. I taught the girls a bit of music, and we just, for about 5-6 weeks, we did the same music every week. Sounds a bit boring, but it got them used to the shape of choral evensong and to learn some music. And then we built up from there. And very soon, it became a really good choir. That was more about the girls involved rather than my teaching, I think. But it was great. And that really started my great love. And I've championed girls' choirs in England for so long now. And then I started, so then I remember the rector's wife said to me, so you've now got a choir for boys, you've now got a choir for girls, so what about me? And so we started a little choral society. And I put an advert in the church news saying we were going to start this. And we were going to have rehearsal the following week, 7:30 in the evening. And I remember it vividly because I think there were about 30 women that turned up and one man. And he looked absolutely terrified. But I saw on Facebook just last week that the same choir that I started all those years ago was doing they were doing a concert last week, huge repertoire, and it's great to know that happened. And then we used that to look at instrumental music as well. And so we started a children's orchestra that were able to play sort of classical things and also to play more contemporary music as well, because we had a church plant in the parish which was very evangelical, and so we wanted to do that. And I've always believed, I always think that evangelical music has suffered a little bit because people think, oh, a church band, it just happened. But actually, it needs to be rehearsed, it needs to be done well, and I've always believed very strongly in that. So from Warwick, after 9 years, I then went to Sheffield Cathedral up there, which is what we call a parish church cathedral. No choir school, it just simply getting kids from all across the country. And again, they didn't have a girls' choir, so I had to start a girls' choir there. And they were the most wonderful children I think I've ever worked with. And they were so keen. We used to rehearse on a Saturday morning, and sometimes I couldn't make it because I lived out of the city. And the girls, I'd say, right, we're going to cancel this week. And they wouldn't let me cancel. So they used to run the rehearsals themselves without me, which was amazing. And I learnt an awful lot there. And it was very special, and it was very real. It was very real. When I started, the boys' choir, they all supported the same soccer team. And I realized that if on a Saturday the local soccer team lost, trying to do Palestrina with the boys on the next morning was almost impossible. Whereas if they won, it was a breeze in the park, so that was good. And then right-hand side, you'll all recognize that building. My dream job, since I was a little boy, I wanted to be the organist of Salisbury Cathedral, and I feel richly blessed that not many people get to achieve absolutely what they want. I didn't believe I'd ever get the job, but somehow I did. And I spent 9 very, very happy years at Salisbury, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And then I spent 1 year at Jesus College, Cambridge, running the choir there. And that was a wonderful experience because the students were so keen and they just lapped up everything that I gave them. So very, very special time. So I feel richly blessed that from being a little boy at St. Paul's up to Salisbury Cathedral, that I've experienced everything. And let you think that everything's been a huge success, because it hasn't. You know, it's been tough along the way at times, but great times. So now I'm going to click on, and here we are, Salisbury Cathedral. So your choir are going to be in residence in Salisbury. So I just wanted to say a little bit about Salisbury. So the cathedral, it's unbelievable really, 404 foot high, the spire. It took 38 years to build, 38 years only. In 2020 it was started, and it finished in 2058. The spire was then added in 1320, and they had to put, if you go inside it, they had to put all these buttresses in because it added another 6,500 tons of stone, and it would have fallen down otherwise. 404 foot high, but the foundation stones are only 4 foot deep. Unbelievable, really. And I'm told that if it's built on a water table, and I'm told that if it had been built sort of like maybe 10, 12 foot one way or the other, it would have fallen down by now. But it hasn't, and it's just a remarkable, remarkable place. It's early English Gothic. It's run by the dean and chapter, so we have a dean, and then we have 3 residentiary canons, the precentor, who's in charge of the music, we have a chancellor and a treasurer. And the Sarum Rite, you might have heard of the Sarum Rite, you might not have heard. The Sarum Rite basically was a very historical, liturgical process whereby they discovered, well, they didn't discover, they wrote all the sort of mass, how a mass should work, how all liturgy should work. It was very, very intricate and very definite. And cathedrals across the country followed the Sarum Rite. It was a sort of like, it was the patent for the best liturgical practices in the country. And so it's very, very important and has been followed to this day. And also, Salisbury had, or has, one of only, I think, 3 original Magna Cartas. And I'm sure you know about the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. But the Magna Carta was formed in 1215 by King John. And it was just a way of making peace with a group of English barons. And they were protesting against high taxes demanded by the king. And so the Magna Carta limited the powers of the monarchy and said that the king or the queen had to be subject to all the laws that the rest of us were subject to. And so it was sort of, you know, it governed all the laws of the land, really. And it also has a sort of prominent place in the history of the United States as well, because its concepts of equality under the law is enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, your Constitution, and your US Bill of Rights. So if you go to Salisbury, you need to go and see the Magna Carta, which is in a lovely case there. So when I was at Salisbury, Salisbury is particularly well known as being the first English cathedral that brought girl choristers into the choral foundation. So the idea from my predecessor was that girls should have absolutely the same opportunities as the boys. So we used to rehearse every morning, myself and my assistant, and I used to take whichever choir was on duty for the day in the practice room, and my colleague would take the other group, and then we would, at the evening, we would have another rehearsal with the adult singers, only six men, and we would do that every single day. Where there were services every day, 3 on Sunday, so it was very busy. Never mind concerts, never mind other things. People say to me, did you train the girls any differently from the boys? And the answer was no, absolutely the same. same sort of technical rehearsals, and we did it exactly the same. The only thing that I noticed was, those of you who are teachers maybe know the same thing, that I noticed that with the boys, I've always thought this, and forgive me if it's the wrong perception, but with the boys, if they did something wrong, or they made a mistake, or they were a bit naughty, which they were from time to time, if you just sort of reprimanded them and said, stop doing that, whatever, they'd just sort of go, huh. And then 2 minutes later, that would be it. I made the mistake after about a week at Salisbury. There was a little girl who decided it would be quite good to have a chat during the rehearsal, and I'm pretty laid back generally, but I did reprimand her and tell her that she should be concentrating. I don't think she talked to me for about 6 weeks. So I mean, you sort of dealt with them slightly differently, but they were both absolutely wonderful and absolutely really special, and that was a great joy. And sometimes we put them together, but not often. These days in our English cathedrals, they do sort of join together a little bit more than they used to, but it was very special. In those days, we used to have voice trials, and I remember, because we were the first girls' choir, we used to have sort of like 40 girls applying for 4 places. So, it was an absolute pick. And these girls could sight read absolutely anything. It was an absolute joy. So when the choir from St. John's goes to Salisbury next year, you are going to be part of the most amazing heritage, the most amazing tradition. The English choral tradition, dare I say it, is the envy of the world. And I'm always humbled by the fact that when I come to the US, that your wonderful choristers across the land, the one thing they want to do is to come and sing in our wonderful cathedrals in England. And as the director of music myself, when I worked at Salisbury, I was very conscious of the great sacrifice and the great commitment that all our visiting choirs made to our worship. It is integral in the summer, when the cathedral choir is not in residence, that choral worship continues. And our deans and chapters in our cathedrals are very grateful to all of you and people from across the world who come and sing. And so when St. John's choir goes next year, they will be welcomed. They will also have the most wonderful time. It is one of the most extraordinary buildings in the world. It has one of the finest organs. It's a wonderful place to sing. There's a nice acoustic. And your choir will be leading the liturgy in one of the great cathedrals. So many people want to go and sing at Salisbury, so you're very lucky to get in and to do it. And I hope very much that all of you that perhaps don't know quite so much about music will support the choir in this endeavour, because I think it's very special. And it's not only just about taking part in a centuries-old tradition, but my experience as a choir master taking my choir to various places is that when you come back from something like going to the UK and singing, your choir is refreshed, they are inspired, they've learnt so much. When you're singing every day, it'll be the chance for Steve to be able to absolutely cross every T and dot every I, and work it with great detail. They will come back refreshed, totally inspired, and sing even better than they did before. And so I really hope that you will support them on this fantastic endeavour, and I'm very excited. I live not all that far from Salisbury now, and I sort of miss it, but I did it for 10 years, and I thought I need to do some other things now, do a new challenge. But I will certainly come and listen to the choir sing on a number of occasions, hopefully while they're over there. So I'm here now. I think I've just about said all I need to say, but I'm here now, as I say, tomorrow. What is it? Tomorrow is Monday. Is it Monday tomorrow? We're starting the RSCM course with the girls, and I've already worked with the adults, and they were fantastic. Did everything I asked them to do very, very well. So I'm very excited to meet the girls and to work with them. And so next Sunday morning, we're going to be here at St. John's. We're going to be singing some Mozart. I had my arm twisted to do one of my own pieces, and some William Byrd, and it's his 400th anniversary of his death now. And we've got a little, some strings as well, so it's going to be a really special occasion. So I do encourage you to come along next week and listen to the girls and see the fruits of our labours over the last week. So I'm very grateful to everyone for their very warm hospitality and warm welcome. I mean, literally warm. In England, we're in a heat wave at the moment. We're in a heat wave, and I think at the highest for the last 3 weeks, it's been. I thought it was boiling hot, and it was like 27 degrees, whatever that is. It's sort of getting on for sort of 78, something like that. So I come here and it's 104. I mean, as it's Father's Day, I contacted my daughters and my son and my wife this morning, and they were asking me how I'm getting on, and I told them, they were saying they'd been in the pool at home, and our pool is a sort of plastic one, you understand, but because it's cold most of the time. And I told them it was 104 degrees, and it was like, no way, Daddy, no way. But I'm sure I'll manage. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I haven't been too self-indulgent, but I just wanted you to understand that the tradition that we have in our country is so very special. And so many children have gone through this, and so many children have benefited from it. We suffered a little bit in the pandemic, but it is coming back now, but it's getting more difficult. So any church like this church that has a wonderful choral tradition should be very grateful for all that they have and all that it offers along the way. Anna asked me if anyone had a question they'd like to ask me, as long as it's an easy question, I'll have a go at answering.
How long it took to build Salisbury and when it was built. It sounded like you were talking about the future. You cited 2038 or something, which is still...
Yeah, it took 38 years simply to build the whole thing.
And when did they start?
They started in 2020, and they finished in 2058. And I mean, unbelievable. 38 years.
I don't understand how it's 2058. This is 20...
2020 was when they put the foundation stones down, and then in 38 years, they did the rest. They built the whole thing except the spire. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, I got a question about the naming of tunes. So when I look in the hymnal, one thing I see a lot is that a lot of tunes are named after places.
Yep.
So what are some of the customs of tune naming, and what are your songs called?
Good question. I mean, I'm fascinated by the names of tunes, of hymns. There are also, so let's take, for example, Come Down, O Love Divine, Come Down, O Love Divine, written by Ralph Vaughan Williams, and that's called Down Ampney. And his father was a priest, and his father was the rector of Down Ampney. So Holst wrote a tune, and Thaxted, and that's where he used to worship at that church. A lot of tunes, you'll find some sort of tenuous connection or obvious connection, and people just call their hymn tunes by whatever is sort of special to them. And it's actually quite a fun game to think, you come across a hymn tune, you think, why was it called that? And sometimes you do a little bit of research and you discover that somebody once knew somebody who went there or was inspired by something. I've only written, in terms of hymn tunes, I've only written a couple of hymn tunes, and I used to live in the north of England for a while, in what we call the Peak District, and one of my tunes, I think I actually called it Peak District or something like that. So that's not very innovative, is it? But I mean, I tend to write more for the church anthems and canticles and things like that. So they didn't really have. I wrote a set of canticles for the girls' choir at Warwick, which I called the St. David's service, because our first performance was in St. David's Cathedral. Yeah.
Yes, I have a question
Yeah.
maybe they're agnostic now, but I was wondering if you could comment on your commercial work or working with rock musicians.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe the influence of church music to contemporary, I don't know, it's a training ground for musicians.
Well, I think that's a very interesting question. I think for me personally, having done all the things I did in the church, and I now tend to work in the more commercial world with, pop artists as well and things like that. And in fact, I worked for quite a long time with a rock band, and I was sort of orchestrating stuff for them. And then we went on tour around Europe with an orchestra and a rock band. I mean, it was the most extraordinary experience. And my sort of method there was, right, okay, well, I've been trained how to conduct Mozart and Bach, so why can't I conduct Led Zeppelin or the Beatles or something like that? What I found difficult about that, I mean, I absolutely loved that. What I found difficult was that are you familiar with click tracks and things like that? So that's where you in your ear, you have a sort of pulse, you have a beat which keeps it together. So when we worked with the rock band, we had to rehearse very thoroughly. There was no room for improvisation if you had an orchestra as well. So we all had earpieces, and you could hear this sort of click, and a couple of the guys kept coming in the wrong place, so you'd have a sort of vocal saying, Darius, 3 bars, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the orchestra weren't on click track. It was just me. So I conducted the orchestra. I had the rock band behind me, and I had to have my click turned up so loud because, do you know what? If you go to a rock concert, as soon as you hear the first riff of some popular piece, everyone goes crazy and they start stamping. And I had to keep this orchestra of 40 players in time, but it was almost impossible because everyone out there was like clapping and hollering and everything. But I mean, so I just translate the skills that I have into a different, so I orchestrate stuff for a lot of artists. And again, I know I've studied orchestration for the classical composers, so I now over the years, I've picked up how to do it. So I think if you're a professional musician, you've got to have a sort of breadth of knowledge, and you've got to be open to anything. And that's in a way why I left church music. I still love it dearly, but I wanted new challenges. I wanted somebody to say to me, can you do that? Can you do that? Whatever it is, And so it's a great life. I really enjoy that. I'm aware that my time is up. Thank you very much for listening indeed. Oh, Anna. $12.20. Oh yes, 1220. Sorry if I didn't make that clear. Yeah, 1220 was when it started. So like 800 years ago, 900 years ago. Yeah, not at 20 past 12. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, and I hope to see you next week at the Eucharist.